Hey, if you have a Bible, go with me to Genesis chapter 3. As you're turning there, let me just give you a real brief description of what we're going to do starting today and over the next few weeks. We've felt like in the past month or up to maybe even a year, we've continued to see a lot of newer faces as a part of our congregation, which praise the Lord and thank you for being a part of it. Honored and blessed that we get the opportunity to do that and to be a part of a church where God continues to move and grow and bring people in to the work that He is doing here. And so in that, want to just kind of use an opportunity over the month of February to define some very baseline things and very fundamental things that we are as a church. In fact, what we did over the past few months in January is grounded and rooted in the Lord's Prayer. We spent some time talking about what we were praying for as a congregation in this upcoming year. A lot of things as we pray are about how we would move forward in the church. In order to do that, we felt like the foundations of the church needed to be clearly stated, clearly reminded and articulated what we are about. And so today, the most important and foundational of them all, we're just going to talk about the gospel, right? And so if you've been in church for a long time, might not find it to be the most profound or new sermon. However, you might and should find it to be one of the most exciting and refreshing things that we preach about with consistency, because all of it comes back to this good news that is in Jesus Christ for the glory of God. And so we just spend some time laying that out and here together in it. And then moving forward from that, over the next several weeks, we'll talk about some things that the gospel compels of us, what it looks like to be a part of the church, what it looks like to be taking the ordinances of the church, baptism and the Lord's Supper. So we'll take the Lord's Supper together next week and spend a good amount of time talking about it, along with baptism, these two things that Christ commands us to do as a part of what it looks like to be the church. We'll talk about membership, and then we'll talk about service and what it looks like to be a people who care for one another and care for the world on behalf of and because of caring for the Lord and the Lord's caring for us. And so that's what the next 4 weeks look like, kind of laid out for you, excited about it, but it means that today we focus on what is the most instrumental question in all of the Scripture. We're going to be concise, relatively short, especially with our young people here, but want to just simply answer this question: what is the gospel? In fact, as a church, one of the things that we've said is a priority and a focus of ours is that we would be focused on, centralized on the gospel, and not spend too much time getting lost in minor or peripheral issues, elevating them to a position that is above or takes precedent over the gospel. And so in doing so, it makes sense for us to really spend a good amount of time clearly defining what that is and how we do that. Now, before we answer that question, which is where we'll spend the bulk of our time, I wanted to maybe just kind of take a second to note that all of us in this room are in very different places in regards to the way we might view ourselves in our coordination with that question. In fact, I remember a few years back, I was in college and I like to talk to people. I know you guys are surprised by that, right? We were talking yesterday, Whitney was talking yesterday about how when we used to write papers in college, she'd have a lot of trouble getting like past page 3 out of a 10-page paper, and me was like page 62, and I'm trying to cut stuff out because I just typed and it just went, right? And then you're like, I got to get this down. Doesn't matter. Anyways. Example, right? So I like to talk, I used to try to find ways during my time in college to just meet people in a context where I could talk about things that mattered, things that were on a deep and spiritual level without it being incredibly weird or awkward. And so what I used to do is a friend of mine and I would go out with a video camera. This was few years ago, right? The video cameras were bigger back then, and we would go and we'd ask if we could film some people doing a series of interviews, trying to learn things about people. Now, maybe you think that is super weird. I actually felt like it was the most interesting and kind of offsetting way to get people to come and open up. You know, you stick a camera in somebody's face, they just want to talk, right, sometimes. And so we used to just interview people, strangers at a bus stop, and go, hey, we're making this film, wonder if we could ask you some questions. We'd ask them questions about all kinds of spiritual things to try to understand a little bit about where people came from. Now, it's a college, a very secularized environment, and so you would get all kinds of different answers. Well, one of the questions that I would go back to oftentimes was we would ask people what it means to be a Christian. In fact, there's a good deal of people who would answer questions about their spirituality, identifying themselves as Christian. And so the follow-up question would be, well, what does that mean? Now, what was always fascinating to me, and perhaps you've asked similar questions, is you get a wild variety of answers. In fact, I'm convinced that if we were to, this morning, we're not going to do it for the sake of your embarrassment, right, to ask you, what does it mean to be a Christian? I would guess that we're going to find a good variety of answers. Sometimes those answers are wildly off base with what the Bible has to say about what a believer, a follower of Jesus, a Christian is. Everything from what they do and what they don't do, to what box you check on a piece of paper, to what your parents were raised as. Man, it's just a mess of different things that you could use as defining characteristics. However, Scripture's really clear that there is a very focused and very complete definition of what that means, which is what we'll spend our time today in. But the reality is, I think there's some of you in this room who aren't Christians, right? Don't identify as Christians. In fact, wouldn't identify yourself as someone who is saved or knows the Lord, or all these different terms we use for it. In fact, you're probably not even sure that you would want to be that. And the reality is that I think in our culture, you've probably been inundated with a whole lot of stuff that has to do with churches, and a whole lot of stuff that has to do with what Christianity is, and yet you maybe have never in your life heard or understood a succinct and concise definition of what it looks like to know Jesus. I think there's probably a large contingent of you in here who would identify yourselves as Christians, as followers of Jesus, and maybe you don't know Him at all. I had a conversation a couple weeks ago with a lady I used to work with, and talking to her on the phone, and worked with her for like 3 years, knew her fairly well, and so we're having this phone conversation just before Christmas, and I said something about, happy Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, because I really honestly believe she didn't identify as a follower of Jesus, right? And so I said, Happy Holidays, just trying to be kind, and she said, Nick, I am a Christian. And I was like, that's a big surprise to me. It shouldn't be a surprise, right? If you get that response, that's bad news for your life, right? So that's a big surprise to me. She said, no, I have been my whole life, done the things, went through the whole works, right? I got the baptism, and I did the classes, and I got the confirmation, and, I eat the stuff when I go every once in a while, and we stop at Christmas, and we stop at Easter, and I do the things. I'm a Christian. I said, is that what makes you a Christian? She said, yeah. I said, this sounds like a weird question, but I said, I thought you were Jewish. He goes, no. My dad's Jewish, but my mom is Christian, and in the Jewish community, you take the mom's religion, and so I'm a Christian because my mom is a Christian. Okay. Let me help you. This is not what it means to be a Christian. In fact, maybe there's some of you in here who have been checking off church attendance boxes for your whole life. Maybe you're relatively new to this. Maybe you like the idea of religion. The reality is that the Bible doesn't have a lot to say about those being marked criteria to make someone know or not know the Lord. Now, along with that, with our young people in here this morning with us, the reality is that there are many of you who have grown up in either this church or the context of a church since you were itty-bitty, right? And in that, you have identified as your parents are Christians, right? And so you just come. Church is a part of your life, but maybe never in your life you made a decision of your own that Jesus is who you intend to follow. Jesus is who you intend to trust. God is where you're going to place your faith. And then there's probably a large group of us who would sit this morning going, I know the Lord, I know what the gospel is, and I'm submitted to it. And here's what I'm going to tell you this morning. One of the greatest frustrations in my life are people who I'm confident are followers of Jesus Christ who cannot articulate the gospel to someone else in any way, shape, or form. Okay, and I know that I'm looking at some of you. I'm trying not to make eye contact right now, right? Like I'm looking above you so that you don't think I'm talking to 4 of you, because I'm talking to a lot of you. But listen, one of the really saddening truths about the church in its current state and condition, I'm not talking just here, I'm talking about the church all across this nation, is that you have people who are knowing, following, believing in Jesus, and yet upon being asked have no way of accurately describing what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ, have no way of accurately answering the question, what is the gospel? And so you get lost in all of these different places talking about things that are ultimately peripheral to what is the core essential truth of what it means to know and follow Jesus. And so my hope, my prayer for this morning is that as we concisely and try to clearly lay that out according to Scripture, that it would give you a greater sense of security and a greater sense of assurance to know this is how I answer that question. This is how I talk to my coworkers. This is how I connect with my neighbors. This is the stuff that I focus on in family gatherings. This is the thing that I use as my baseline, my guidance in order to have spiritual conversation with people, in order to, as Peter calls it, stand ready and prepare to give a defense of the hope that is in us, the hope of Jesus Christ. All right, so that's kind of my take on this morning, and my hope for you is no matter where you're at, that you would find great value in what the gospel is and how deep and wide it affects us as individuals and together as a church under the glory of God. So you have a Bible, go with me to Genesis chapter 1. We're going to start walking from the very beginning. Genesis chapter 1. If you don't have a Bible, there's a black one in the pew in front of you. It's the first book. So open it up. It's like page 1, right? And here we are. This is the answer to the gospel question, right? In fact, the word in Greek, it literally just means good news. The gospel is the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, if you haven't thought this through, in order to have good news, you must first have bad news, right? Like, sir, I'm not going to give you a ticket today, right? Like, that's good news, but it means that you got pulled over first, right? Like, there's some bad news that precedes the good news. Otherwise, it's just news. And so in it, the good news of Jesus Christ begins with us investigating or moving back far enough that we might see the bad news. So Genesis 1 begins like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw the light, and it was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. The Bible begins in Genesis 1 speaking about the creation account, and the start of it all is that God is there in the beginning. The reality and perhaps the most deep and glorious truth in all of mankind is that we exist with God as the sovereign creator of all things, that He creates them holy and righteous, that there is a God. And that this God is the God over all the universe, and He holds all things together. In fact, from the beginning, God exists in perfect unity in and amongst Himself. The Bible uses, or the church uses a word called Trinity or tri-unity of God. It means God exists co-equally as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And in it, all of them serve as one another in perfect harmony, in perfect relationship with one another from the beginning. You see it in the first verses of the Bible, that God is there, God the Father. It says the Spirit of God, by verse 2, is there hovering over the waters, that God's Spirit is there in creation. And then in verse 3, it says God speaks. We find out later in the New Testament that Jesus is that Word, speaking agent of God. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And so God, Father, Son, Spirit, God together in unity from the beginning. Now, there has always been, and there always will be, some who will deny the very existence of a God of the universe. They'll find all kinds of different ways and excuses to come up with it. What's really fascinating is we exist in a place, in a culture, where a lot of the times that seems to be the more educated and enlightened viewpoint of humanity, that if you were to just learn enough, you would ascend to the place where you no longer had a need for or a belief in God. And yet, what's fascinating is thousands of years earlier in the Psalms, David is recognizing that there's fools that would say out of their worldly wisdom, there is no God, that it's not a new thing. In fact, if you were to read and study and do a little bit of research, you find that significantly and consistently through all of time, there has been people who deny the very existence of God, and yet the vast, vast majority of humankind knows from the deepest longings inside of us that God is real, evident, sovereign, and holy over all creation. The Bible speaks about it frequently, and I want to get this across to you, speaks about the distance between a holy and sovereign God and the minuscule nature of you and I as His creation, that He is so great, so big, so powerful that we are minute and minuscule and small in comparison. My favorite account of this, there's a guy in the Old Testament named Job. J-O-B, reads like Job. He shows up, happens to be a guy who knows and fears the Lord. By all intents and purposes, a really good guy. And God, in a conversation with the adversary, the devil, says, look at my servant Job. In fact, he calls him perfect. He says, this is an upright man. He doesn't do anything wrong. The resulting kind of dialogue in the spiritual realm is that all of the earthly things that Job possessed should be taken from him. His stuff, his kids, his family, his health, everything goes south. And even in his righteousness, Job, eventually in moments of weaknesses, looks to God and begins to complain, if you will. In fact, the book of Job talks about how he eventually turns to the Lord thinking, how could this possibly happen, right? I did all of this, and God answers him and says, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who set its measurements, since you know? Or who stretches the line on it? On what were its bases sunk? Who laid its cornerstones? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who enclosed the sea with doors when bursting forth it went out from the womb? When I made a cloud its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and I placed boundaries on it, and the sea set a bolt and doors, and I said, thus far you shall come, but no farther, and here you shall proud your waves stop. That Job is answered by God that he's the creator of the world, right? Where were you? You don't know. Right? You don't know that I was the one who made all of this and set it into motion. That the gospel begins with the fact that we are all created under a glorious and righteous God. Now, the book of Genesis goes on to outline God's creation, and then in that, the creation of mankind. Not because he was lonely, but because in his glory, the outpouring of his joy formed man and followed with woman. It's a beautiful story. In fact, the story concludes in Genesis 2:25 with this. The man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. The quick summation of all that happens, God creates birds and fish, land and sea, grasses and trees, man. Looks around, all finds a suitable helper, not among any of the animals that he's created. And so from man, he takes and creates woman. They're together in the garden. The Bible says that they're walking with God in the cool of the day. It's this picture of beautiful and wondrous harmony under the righteous hand of the Lord. And there they exist for the first 2 chapters of the Bible. Now, the gospel begins with God. It moves second to who we are as mankind, which is Genesis 3. Here's how the account reads. It says, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field, which the Lord had made. And he said to the woman, 'Indeed, as God said, you should not eat from any tree of the garden.' And the woman said to the serpent, 'From the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat from it or touch it, or you will die.' The serpent said to the woman, 'You surely will not die, for God knows that in the day that you eat it, your eyes will be opened, and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil.' When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took from its fruit and ate. She gave also to her husband with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made for themselves loin coverings. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. And the Lord called to the man and said to him, 'Where are you?' And he said, 'I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid myself.'" Verse 10 is one of the most depressing verses in all of the Scriptures. Man who was once unashamed and walking with God hides himself from him, following what we know in the Christian circle as the original sin. Here's how it plays out, right? God has placed man and woman in the garden, given them dominion over the earth, allowed them to work it. They're there in great joy. Shows up a serpent and says, "Hey, did God tell you there was nothing that you couldn't do?" And she says, "Yeah, I can't eat from that tree." Again, this is not like a taxing rule, right? This is plain and simple. You can eat from anywhere in the garden, but the greatest source of joy in your life is when you're in obedience to me, God, so don't touch that tree. Serpent shows up. The wife goes, "Well, I don't think we should eat from that tree." He goes, "Well, it just would make you super smart," right? She takes the fruit. The husband, come on, guys. I feel like a lot of times, if you're in the Christian circles familiar with this, you go, "Well, the wife's the one that ate the fruit and gave it to the husband. It was her fault first." Listen, they're together naked in the garden, right? What's he doing? Fishing? Come on. Be there, be a part of this. They eat together, they sin against the Lord, and here's what it sets off. It sets off the beginning of a broken and sinful and fallen humanity. The gospel is this: one, that there is a God who is sovereign over all of the universe, and two, that you and I are incapable of walking in the holiness, righteousness, and obedience to Him that He demands in His righteousness. The church word we use for that is sin. That we not only commit sins as actions, but that in our wombs conceived, we are sinful. That, in fact, the thing that our babies come out best at doing is sinning, right? They come out, their only focus is on themselves. They want what they want. When they don't get it, they cry, right? That stops at 16? I don't know. I'm not to the point where I can answer that question yet. Our oldest is 8, right? In this, we become people who just continue to grow in our sin. It's, if anything, it's what I'm convinced we're best at in all of humanity. Even when we're trying to do well. Isaiah the prophet wrote it this way. He says, "It's our righteous deeds that are filthy rags before the Lord." Not the worst actions of our humanity, but when we're trying our best, we still fail and fall miserably short over and over and over again. Now, what this plays out as in Genesis chapter 3, the sin separates man from God. That God in His holiness, God in His righteousness says, I won't exist in the presence of this sin. Now His grace and mercy and love is shown from the beginning. That in this He casts man and woman out of the garden. He makes garments for them. He tells them that redemption will come. In Genesis 3:15, He speaks to the woman and says, there's going to be a seed of your offspring who will crush the head of this serpent, that will defeat this sin someday. But until then, you are blocked from my presence. You cannot coexist with me in my righteousness. Now, what ensues from there continues to this day. And it is that we continue to try to find ways to reconcile our sin before God. And we've created an entire culture that is built upon finding ways to make ourselves more presentable so that we might ultimately do away with this sin problem in our lives. The most common, by far, is we begin to trust in ourselves as the solution to our own sin and shortcomings, right? It works like this. We know that we got some things in our lives that are a little jacked up, but we're working on it. Amen? You got a culture that is filled with a self-help, self-improvement mentality that says somewhere out there there's this better version of you that is acceptable, that is good, and that is fulfilling in life. You see, sin leaves this void. It leaves this absence of communion and fellowship with God that we were meant to have. And so we've devised this entire culture that builds itself on you ultimately growing into a place where that void is going to be filled. And the thing that's so fascinating is you can pursue and pursue and pursue, and it never finds itself filled. Amen? And yet, we've been captured into a place that thinks, well, if I just lost 5 more pounds, if I just got that next promotion, if I just was a little bit better at this or a little bit better at that, it would solve this longing, this aching, this urging that is inside me that makes me feel so incomplete and irreconciled. Amen? In fact, we exist in a time and place where in just a few hours, people are going to spend literally billions of dollars convincing you that they have the thing that would bring that fulfillment to you, right? In 30-second ads. You need new car insurance, and that longing inside of you will be solved. You need a better drink, and that longing inside of you will be solved. You need, and fill in the blank, right? Some of them will be funnier than others. Ultimately, they're all just trying to tell you that there's something that will replace that lack and that absence and that longing inside of your soul that says things are not right, things are not reconciled because you and I are broken and away from God. Now, the second thing our culture does really well, if you've kind of passed self, is you begin to place that same idol onto others. Right? Whether it's a spouse or whether it's kids, you start to look at someone else and go, I feel so incomplete, I feel so broken, I feel so away from the holy and righteous God that maybe somebody else will fill this void. Young adults always do this, right? From age like 17 to when you get married, there's this idea that somewhere out there is going to be that spouse that just completes you, that just fixes everything. And then you can't figure out why your marriage breaks down when you realize that person, farts at night, right? Like, you can't figure out why this person wasn't the completion that you were looking for, and they just do a lot of things wrong. That was like date 1, but she's getting better at it, That is the word. I'm in so much trouble. I'm sorry. I'm going to buy you flowers. But it won't make you happy because I can't complete you. All right? Because here's the thing, right? We move past that and into, and this world just loves to suck you into this one, into feeling like there's some material or consumer possession that'll answer this sin problem. Something will fix it. right? We did a study last year in the book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon, the king of Israel, the most powerful man in the world at the time, explains and displays this attitude in a way that is more than most of us will ever know. He says, I did everything. He said, I had the most money, I bought the most stuff, I built the greatest things, I had the most women, I had the most wine, I had the most pleasure, I had the most entertainment, I did fun thing after fun thing after fun thing. I built gardens and parks and forests and ponds. It was never enough that I pursued all of the stuff the world could offer. And it all found to be lacking. In fact, in Ecclesiastes 3, he says this, that God has made everything appropriate in its time, and he has set eternity in their heart so that man will not find out the work which God has done from beginning to end. What he was noting was that even amongst all of this pursuit to fix this gap, this void in his heart left by our sin, he couldn't find it because God had set eternity in our heart. That God had made us to long and groan for a time where we would be reconciled to him. And we couldn't plug it in with enough stuff to solve it, despite what every single Super Bowl commercial is going to tell you, that we couldn't get to a point where we just felt satisfied by something other than God. And then last, and the one that I think oftentimes we get deceived into, is that we start to think that we could just be religious enough to solve this problem. That we could start following the rules, and we could be moral enough, and we could walk the line well enough, and if we went to the proper services on the proper day, and we did the right things at the right time, and we were really good at being obedient, that we could work our way back into communion with God, and we could work our way back into a satisfactory relationship with God. I was on a plane a few months back and sat next to this 20-year-old girl. She was flying somewhere from Madison, had met her boyfriend for the weekend, and was heading off. I struck up a conversation with her. Some of you know when I get on a plane, I'm a dangerous person to sit by, right? Because you're locked in, right? They buckle you and don't let you get out, and they make you turn your phone off. You're there for an hour and a half. I'm coming at you, right? I'm going to talk to you. I'm sitting down, talking to this girl, asking her about this. This is what she says. She says, yeah, I'm religious a little bit. I said, okay, what does that mean? She said, well, I guess I'm Jewish. I said, okay. I said, what does that mean? She said, well, ultimately, all religions are the same. You just do the stuff and be a good person, and God rewards you for that. Now, here's the thing. She's not wrong. All religions are the same. The dangerous piece of religion is that it has become this solution to a sin problem, that you could be a good enough person, you could do things well enough that you would ultimately find God as forgiving and satisfactory in you because you've worked your way up to him. Here's what makes Christianity so different. It's not a religion like that. In fact, the reality and prevailing truth of Christianity is that all have sinned and fall short of God's glory, and that you continue to fall short of his glory. And no matter how hard you try, and no matter how hard you work, and no matter what you decide is your source of solution, that they all fail, and that you will never be good enough to please God on your own. That's the basis of the faith. Because here's what happens. God, in his great love for us, doesn't leave it up to us. Instead, he sends one, his Son, Jesus Christ, to come and redeem us. That word redeem, it literally means to buy back, to purchase us back to him. The Bible says it this way. 1 Peter in chapter 1 says that you were not redeemed with perishable things like silver and gold from your futile way of life inherited from your forefathers. That it didn't matter how hard you worked or how much money you made or what you did well, that those things wouldn't make you right with God, but rather it was with precious blood, as that of a lamb, unblemished and without spot, the blood of Christ. That he didn't enter through the blood of goats and calves, but his own blood. He entered the holy place once for all, obtaining for us eternal redemption, is what the author of Hebrews writes. Or Titus, Paul writes to Titus and says this, that Jesus gave himself for us to redeem us, to buy us back from every lawless deed, and to purify for himself a people for his own possession, zealous for good deeds. The gospel is this, that there is a God who is God over all the universe. That you and I and every human being that ever exists suffers from sin. That in it we have segregated ourselves from God in His righteousness and His holiness. And the only reconciliation, you can try anything you want, the only reconciliation is in the redeeming blood of His Son, Jesus Christ, who came and was the only one to live a life without sin, who came and gave Himself, experiencing, taking on the punishment, taking on God's wrath for sin upon Himself, so that He might buy back, He might redeem a people for His own possession. 2 Corinthians 5 said, He made Jesus, who knew no sin, to be sin on our behalf so that we might become the righteousness of God. That redemption is that God sent Jesus to take all of your sin and put it upon Himself so that He might redeem you. He might buy back a people for His own possession, reconciling you to God in His holiness. Which leads to the fourth point, the last point, right? It's you. What do you do? How do you receive that redemption? The Bible says it this way. Paul, in the book of Romans, writes about it. In fact, Romans is a real interesting letter. It's one of the only letters that Paul the Apostle, if you know a little bit about the Bible, he writes a good portion of the New Testament. It's the only letter he writes to a church that he's never met. He's laying out comprehensively what this good news is, chapter after chapter after chapter, and he's built up in the first 3 chapters how this God of the universe has made all things and how we have sinned and worked against Him, that we have broken His commandments and set a great gap between us and God that could not be bridged by anything but Christ and His redeeming blood. And then he says this in Romans chapter 3. For I say, the demonstration of His righteousness at the present time, so that He, that's Jesus, would be just and justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. Here's his point. Where is boasting, it is excluded. By what kind of law? Of works? No, but by a law of faith. For we maintain that a man is justified by faith apart from works of the law. Here's what Paul wants you to recognize and see. It's as simple as this. What is the gospel? It's that there's a God of all of the universe, righteous, holy, and grand, and He loves you. That He created you and I for the purpose of His glory. And that the one thing that we tend to be really good at is sinning against Him. Rebelling and walking away from Him, and every human being that's ever existed does so. That God, in His love for us and His grace and mercy to show us His glory, didn't allow us to walk only into our own damnation, but sent to us His Son, Jesus Christ, to live without sin, to demonstrate for us a sinless life, and then most of all, to die on a cross, taking upon our sin to buy us back. And He says, this is what you do. You respond by placing your faith in Him. I know works, nothing that you can do in your own power or your own authority, not enough good deeds that would ever make you right before Him, but rather by faith apart from works of the law, that you would receive Him in humility. There is no boasting. You didn't do it, but rather that you would respond placing your faith in Him. It's the gospel. And I don't know where you're at this morning. I'm going to pray for us as we close. The truth is, I would guess you're all around this room, as we spoke about earlier. Some of you never placed your faith in the gospel. Not sure if you want to. Maybe some of you have long called yourself a Christian and would say, I've never trusted Jesus Christ for my salvation. Rather, all of my church attendance, all of my works, all of my good deeds, and thought it was just a box that I checked. Maybe you're a young person and that decision has been your parents', but it's never been your own. Or maybe you're someone here who has rejoiced in Christ for years, and you need to be encouraged that it all comes back to this. I don't know where you're at, but I want to pray and give you some time to do business with the Lord. So I'm going to ask you, I don't do this often, but I'm going to ask you to bow your heads and close your eyes, just so you can concentrate, spend some time alone with the Lord, even in a full room.